Hello again, class. Welcome back. We're going to talk about Romanticism. You should read the lecture notes on how to read poetry that are in Blackboard, as well as any of the other information on poetry that's in the folder that you find useful. Poetry is a little different than a lot of other forms of literature, and a lot of people choose not to start with poetry, but I tend to like to do it because they're short, digestible pieces, and we can kind of ease into the interpretation. And so poems are basically the most abstract form of literature that you're going to get. Sometimes they tell a story, like with the epic poems and the Iliad and the Odyssey and all that stuff. But a lot of the times they don't really tell a story at all, and they have another purpose, either to reveal some sort of deep emotional truth or some other aspect about being human that is captured in the poem in a really unique way. Poems use meter, they use rhyme, and the structure of the poem is way more important than, say, the structure of a novel, for instance. The novel structure is not unimportant. We want to have a clear procession of events and be able to follow what's going on. But the structure of a poem can mean so much more. So make sure you acquaint yourself with those materials in Blackboard. I'm not going to get too much into that right now. What I really want to talk about is Romanticism with a capital R. So what is Romanticism? That is not lovey-dovey, oh my gosh, you're so great, roses are red, violets are blue, gee golly gosh, I sure do love you. That's not what Romanticism is about. Okay, Romanticism is a genre of poetry. Now, what does genre mean? Most of you know what that word means because of music. There are different genres of music. Many of you perhaps like multiple genres of music. Maybe you're one of those people that really only sticks with one. But for the most part, people have different genres of music that they like. What is a genre? It's a category of artistic composition, as in music or literature, characterized by similarities in form, style, or subject matter. Thank you, Google. So that's what we're looking at. We're looking at a style of poetry called Romanticism with a capital R. Where did Romanticism come from? Well, it came from the 18th century mainly. Most of the Romantics were living a few hundred years ago. Okay, but Romanticism is one of those poetic genres that it's far enough in the past to be slightly weird to us, but it's not so far that we can't understand it. So that's really cool. What is the purpose of Romanticism? Well, a lot happened after the Renaissance to change the way that human beings looked at the world. Science became a thing. The scientific revolution became a thing. We had Nicholas Copernicus and the heliocentric model of the solar system, and Galileo, and all of these challenges to the status quo, which before that was specifically governed by religious dogma, mainly Catholic dogma for most of history. And all of a sudden, in a few hundred years, we had a series of movements take place that really changed the way that human beings looked at the world. And science suddenly became the centerpiece of human thought, especially when the Enlightenment came around. Now, many of you may know the Enlightenment from its influence on early American thinkers, specifically those that contributed to the Revolutionary War. If you've ever read Thomas Paine, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, these are all Enlightenment thinkers. And the Enlightenment basically said that the aim of the Enlightenment was to get rid of all the superstition of old, get rid of all of this baggage that human beings had, focus on science, focus on what was real, and focus on human rights. And that's good. A lot of that stuff is really important and it's still present today. But there was a sense of uneasiness on the part of some people, specifically the Romantics with a capital R, that the Enlightenment was trying to do away with this stuff too quickly. We had been subject to religious and mystical thought for a long, long time, and all of a sudden we were sort of expected to get rid of it overnight. Also, the Enlightenment gave rise to the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution was, largely regarded as a good thing. I mean, we all love our cars and technology and all the things that it brought us. But there were some consequences to the Industrial Revolution, specifically on the environment and on human rights and happiness. Workers in early industrial situations, it was not a very good situation. And there were a lot of child laborers at this time, children who were supposed to pick coal at the factory and things like this. All of this stuff was sort of emerging in the time of the Romantics. Specifically, William Blake, he writes about this stuff a lot. And so the Enlightenment isn't to the Romantics wasn't all it was cracked up to be. So they felt they had to respond in some way, to reclaim those aspects of the human spirit that were being so recklessly discarded by the Enlightenment in their view. So one of the things that the Romantic movement strives to do is reclaim the sense of the spiritual or the mystical or the supernatural. You're going to see a lot of heavily spiritual undertones, but not in a conventional way. They sort of played with the spiritual in a way where they made it into something new instead of what it had always been in an attempt to reclaim it. So keep an eye out for that. They also celebrated nature and the beauty and the glory of nature, specifically as it relates to this concept of the sublime. Now that's a band from the 90s, and I'm sure that you guys know them. I hope you do. I'm getting so old that my references don't work anymore, so if you don't know who Sublime is, Google them. No, never mind. Don't Google Sublime. The sublime is the definition is of such excellence, grandeur, or beauty as to inspire great admiration or awe. So the Romantics saw nature as a source of great admiration and awe and inspiration and power, and they wanted to celebrate that in their poetry. So you're going to see that a lot too as well. Keep an eye out specifically. There's a lot of nature in Blake, but there's a lot of nature in the Rime of the Ancient Mariner. In fact, the Rime of the Ancient Mariner is about nature, you could say. It's about a lot of things, but nature is one of the central focuses of that poem, so keep that in mind. They also emphasized emotion. They wanted to capture emotion, which is really where the term romantic comes from. And they believed that emotion was the source of authentic aesthetic experience. That if you could capture emotion, that's really what poetry was about. So that's another goal of the Romantics. And one of the last things I want to say about the Romantics in general is that they often acted as a social conscience. And I mentioned this briefly earlier, but they did. They looked upon the society in which they lived, and they saw a lot of problems with it. And they saw a lot of actors who were worthy of blame that weren't getting it. And so they criticized people very heavily. They criticized the church. They criticized industry and the Industrial Revolution. And they did these things very powerfully. You're going to see in William Blake's The Chimney Sweeper. That's about the church ran orphanages that were, and basically the way the orphanages funded themselves is that they rented the children out as chimney sweepers. And a chimney sweeper is someone, we don't really have this as much today because we don't really use fireplaces in the same way, but the chimney sweeper was supposed to go and clean out the chimneys of all the soot, and it was a very dangerous line of work because you would breathe in a lot of that soot, and it would cause, all kinds of complications. A lot of these people wouldn't live very long if they were committed to being chimney sweepers at a young age. So William Blake really tries to attack that in these poems, and you're going to see the voice of the speakers in William Blake's poetry is very powerful, and he really does shine light on these issues. And if the Romantics had not done this, who knows what our world might look like today? I mean, I think all of us can agree that child labor is a bad idea. And there's a difference between child labor and letting little Junior work the cash register on weekends at mom's store or whatever. But we can see that exploitation of individuals, specifically children, is very bad. There are problems with industry. There are problems with humankind mistreating nature. And so the Romantics are all about this stuff. The poems that you're going to read, I picked two Romantic poets, William Blake, who is one of my favorites, and my other favorite, who is Samuel Taylor Coleridge. I should have remembered that off the spot because my cat is named after him. But anyway, they are a little bit different, but they're both Romantics, and they're both dealing with a similar theme. So when you read the poems from the poetry packet, consider the themes of Romanticism. Also, try to pick apart the imagery of the poems and figure out what exactly the poets are trying to do. And next week, we're going to start with William Blake. I'm going to give a video. I'm going to read Blake's poems. I'm going to talk about them in depth. So if you don't get it right off the bat, it's okay, but try to use this Romanticism thing as a lens to read the poems. And remember, they're a little bit dated and a little bit old, so if the language seems kind of strange, it's all right. We can make it. One of the things that I want to say about William Blake is that he's very big on duality and dichotomies. And one of the things that he does is he had a couple of works called The Songs of Innocence and Experience. And in the Songs of Innocence, he tried to capture the innocence of the human spirit. And in the Songs of Experience, he tried to capture the jaded experience that comes with getting old. Specifically, the Chimney Sweeper poems. One of them is done from the perspective of innocence, and the other one is done from the perspective of experience. And I want you to think about that. Also, The Tiger and the Lamb. The lamb done from the perspective of innocence, the tiger from the perspective of experience. Watch how he plays with these dichotomies. It's very, very cool stuff. There's a lot more going on the surface than meets the eye. So keep an eye out for more videos. Remember Romanticism, and email me with any questions. Have a good one.